got me, to realize that I'm really interested in what we can do to learn more about primates and, how to protect them. But, the at that time and maybe also now, the opportunities to learn about primates or anthropology, the relationships with primates, is quite limited in Singapore. And so I had to go all the way to US where there's no non-human primates to learn about primates. But yeah, so it was a great experience. So for you, right, do you see any, what do you think about the scene in terms of marine conservation and opportunities in Singapore?
I think that there are so many great people doing marine conservation work, particularly also Milin here, who's doing on
Shout out, shout
clams.
out.
I'm Kathy doing sharks and the dorsal effect, Ria at wild, and there's so many opportunities to do intertidal walks. To go to St. John's Island, you can dive in Sister Island. But at the same time, I feel that there is also a gap. Sustainable is a business, and I also I'm working in the corporate space, and I really feel that there is a disconnect. Sometimes I'm not sure why. I haven't been able to really pin upon it. So maybe it'll be good to come up in this discussion. But yeah, to be honest, I also never knew Singapore had such beautiful wildlife, and especially ocean conservation efforts. Like when you go to Sentosa, right? I like to tell this story. You go to Sentosa, you go to East Coast Park, and you just look out, all you see are ships. And like you can't see anything underwater. And only when I went to dive, I was like, oh my goodness, there are such beautiful things. And I never realized that, even Singapore, we have all this beautiful biodiversity as well. So I think that was pretty much the journey for me. Yeah, maybe you want to share with us how did you end up, being the president of Jane Goodall? I think that would be very interesting because I'm sure there are a lot of people here who are also thinking about their career. With COVID, everyone is sort of rediscovering their purpose and how can they contribute. So, sharing with us more of that journey would be really nice to hear.
Please excuse that my dog is barking in the background.
It's okay.
Strangers
You
walking
can.
by. Yeah, so for me, like I mentioned, right, at the time when I was trying to pursue primate studies, there were limited
Mm,
opportunities in Singapore and also in the region.
yeah.
But at that time, Jane Goodall Institute has already started, and they were interested to support students who have an interest in primate studies and environment to see what they can do.
Mm,
So they actually gave me a grant. It's
mm,
actually the first primate grant from Jane Goodall Institute Singapore. And it allowed me to actually go over to Malaysia to learn more about our leaf-eating monkeys, which I also found in Singapore. So that time it was only, even though it was a short 6-month field research, it really got me interested to do more in the field and what we can do with the data that can be applied for conservation. So after that, after I completed the project, I continued to volunteer with JGIS, and I guess slowly volunteer to become the president.
Still volunteering, right?
Still
Leading now
volunteering.
leading.
Yeah. So, you were just mentioning about marine conservation and also, the changes over the years.
Mm.
So what do you think, students who are interested to learn more about marine conservation, what can they do? Like, you mentioned there's a number of projects, but sometimes students are a bit lost. Like, where should I go to? Or, who can I approach? Any advice?
I think I can just kind of share a bit of my experience because when I was in school, same thing, there's not much opportunity. If I wanted to be a marine biologist, I would also have to go study in Australia. But due to family choices, I chose to stay. So that's why I kind of took that semester off to work in the Philippines. And then, I love diving with and swimming with marine creatures every day, but I realized it's also not something feasible in Singapore. So, I think an advice I would give is not to limit yourself, embrace all the opportunities because one thing I also realized when I was working in Philippines is that, there are many great organizations and these organizations also need help in marketing and finance, in planning. So I would say as much as you might want to, go off and be a marine biologist researcher, there are also many ways people can contribute their own impact. So I say that's first, take every opportunity and see how you can help, reach out to organizations. And secondly, I'd say, look at all the youth opportunities. There are so many available, especially in this ASEAN space. There's a lot of collaboration going on. So, you can also follow our Seastainable Facebook group. We have a page where we really share all the opportunities that we have. So I think these are the two things, always open yourself to opportunities and, never be afraid to try. Yeah.
That's really good advice. I guess for like primates, Southeast Asia or
Mm.
larger part of Asia, we do have a huge, diversity of primates. A lot of people don't know because, they might be, seeing the more common primates like the long-tailed macaques, and that's all they're exposed to. But
Mm.
actually, we do have a huge diversity. And when you go out to different areas like Malaysia or Indonesia in the forest, if you have the opportunity to, that's when you can see actually we do have a rich, biodiversity.
Mm.
Yeah. Mm.
Actually, share with me more about that. For me, to be honest, I'm like a total primate noob. I only kind of realized that we have so many primates when I walk at like Bukit Timah or Sungai Buloh. And then there was once I saw these two ladies staring at the banded languars from a distance. I think there were four of them. Excuse me. And I didn't even realize they were the banded languars till like 3 days later. I was thinking, why are they staring so intently at these monkeys?
There's
Oh
a lot that we
no.
need to do to raise awareness.
Exactly. So, I just think
Yeah.
there's such a big disconnect, and we should really use like today's chat to kind of find out a bit more like what's going on in the Singapore space. What are some of the challenges that we face, and what are some of like the common misconceptions? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess you raise a really good point because when you talk about misconception, right? It's
Mm.
especially keywords like monkeys. They would tell me, oh, they're aggressive
Yeah.
or they're naughty. So if they already have this notion in their minds, they might be some of the people that I talk to, they might be a bit more close-minded in terms of trying to learn more about what you're trying to share with them. Because they're like, why do I want to protect monkeys when there's so many of them and they're so aggressive?
Mm.
So I guess it's partly because different primates, they face different threats and are in different situations. So even the long-tailed macaques that people say there are too many of them and they're being aggressive, it's also a wrong notion, because you read all this news from newspapers, right, from social media, but the news that actually turn up on the social media or in popular media is
Mm.
always, or I would say usually, the negative
Mm.
news, like monkey going to your
Mm.
house or
Yeah.
monkey snatching a plastic bag. The news will not be reporting their natural behavior in the forest, just playing or eating fruits from the trees. It's not interesting. So, I would say that based on what we have observed, more than 95% of the time, the monkeys are just doing their own things and not being what you think of them as being aggressive. Only 5% of the time it actually showed up, the behavior that you were describing. But these are the news that would also, be more widely, shared. So I would say because of that, then people might not want to learn more about what there is to do for the other primates that are facing a lot of threats. Even the long-tailed macaques are facing this human-wildlife conflict because of feeding. People feeding them, and so, got them to be reliant on humans for food. And that is really bad because you're giving them human food with, high sugar content, high fat content, and you deprive them of actually what they're supposed to do in the forest, eating the fruits and also dispersing the seeds. You know,
Wait,
uh,
how do they disperse the seeds?
you eat and then you poop out. And
Oh, is it? So is it good, right? Okay, okay, that's
so
very
it's good,
interesting.
it's good. And we do incorporate a lot of fecal analysis in our research. So, looking out for poop. Poop
Oh.
is really, really important. Actually, speaking of poop, it got me, it reminded me of this research that I read somewhere about
Mm-hmm.
how there are some researchers looking at whale poop.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
so I'm not, I don't study about ocean, so it might be a noob question. When they poop, wouldn't it disintegrate in the ocean? How do you actually get the poop? Sorry, it's a stupid
Oh my
question.
gosh. No, not no stupid question. Every question is a good question. And I think the whole point about feeding is correct. Like when we see animals, maybe it's our human psyche think, oh my goodness, so poor thing, let me take care of you and feed you. And it sort of changed their behavior. But funny story, I think poop plays a very big part in analyzing what they eat, right? What's important in a diet. So part of my work in the Philippines was like documenting the whale sharks. So we actually see the pattern on their bodies, we recognize them, and we record who comes in every day. So I call them my friends. We actually have names for them and they visit us every day.
Oh, same for Langus. I'll tell you more later.
Okay, later we'll talk about our friends who we think are friends, but probably they're thinking, who are these stalkers? But yeah, so when we are in the field, we're swimming, and then the whale shark poops. It's very interesting because for a whale shark, they're so big and they look so straight, but when they poop, they just like start squeezing a bit. And then when they start squeezing, right, you're like, okay, I gotta go for it. Because when they straighten up again, like they just blast a whole bunch of shit in your face.
Oh no.
Yeah, and then you have to catch it. And I think at that
Lucky.
point,
How lucky, I'm gonna say. Okay.
so I have to like swim there, and then I have to actually use my hand, scoop up the poop, and then like swim back with it, the hand in the sky. Because if I put it in the water, it will
Yeah.
disintegrate, right? So I think that was a very fun part of my life. I'll just be waiting, then I'll catch it, and I'll carry it, and I'll swim back, put it in a vial, and it'll be sent to the States for testing. Was it UK? I can't remember. But the whole point of it is that we were analyzing their poop to see if that with all this feed that we're throwing to the whale sharks to feed, how does that affect their nutrition and their diet? Yeah, but first I must disclaim, I'm not a marine biologist. I was just like a student looking for purpose doing research.
But you're doing research.
Yeah, but so there's a lot more information on that, but that was just a big part of understanding, using fecal analysis on the impact of wildlife. So maybe you can tell us, like when you pick up the monkeys that eat poop, the poop in Singapore, like what does it look like? Can you tell that they're being fed by unnatural sources?
Okay, so everyone hope you're not eating your lunch right now. We are going into
eating lunch later.
analysis. Yeah, so why I said you were lucky just now when you said the whale shark had the whole amount of poop coming out, because it's visible for you. You can actually take it. But for monkeys, they're so much smaller than the whale shark. So in order to get their poop, if you're lucky, you can see it happen. And when it drops to the ground, it's so tiny and it looks so much like the surroundings, like the soil and the grass and all. It's very difficult to find. And so okay, so one of the methods is you kind of learn the smell. So what I do together with my field partner is to go out there and then look for some of the trees that they were sleeping on and try to smell to see if they're actually poop around. And you also mentioned that poop is really important. Yeah, indeed, they are really important because it contains so much information, especially when you're researching on animals that are hard to find or hard to, I would say, habituate to your presence. So usually they'll run away when they see you. So making data collection really challenging. But with the poop, not only would you know about what kind of food they have eaten so far, because it contains the DNA of the plants or the insects or the little animals that they were feeding on, but it also contains information about parasites. So that's the health of the animals that you're studying. Is it healthy or is it not healthy? And then you can also look at the DNA of the animal themselves. So, you look at the genetic diversity to see whether how they have been affected by, for example, fragmentation of their habitats. So, population might have become smaller and smaller over time, such that, there are signs that inbreeding has been going on. So inbreeding is something, I would say it's similar to what we understand in terms of human inbreeding, where, there is mating between very closely related individuals or family members, such that the infants that were born in later generations would have lower immune system and they will not survive into the long term. So yeah, with the poop, we can learn so much more. But of course, we cannot just depend on poop because, few observations are also very important. For example, if in the poop, you realize that they're eating certain species of plants. So you know that maybe they're eating durians or maybe they're eating rambutans or, things like that. But you don't know which plant parts do they like to eat. So, in a tree, there's like the leaves, the flowers, the fruits, right? And it's really important to know what plant parts they like to go for. So then, seasonal changes, what kind of, habitat they need in order to survive. So, few observations, that's when you can see what plant parts they like to go for. So yeah, good that you mentioned about poop, because I've been wanting to say that poop is really important and we should really look into studying the poop from different animals in Singapore to learn more about them. Like, pangolins, colugos and things like that.
Yeah, I think they are, to a commoner, like to someone who doesn't study it, right, it'll just look like poop all the same. So sometimes you see it, right, like you step on poop on the floor, you also don't know where it comes from. Yeah. But no, I think, it's a good point. We have the whole point about biodiversity is also observing the things that go around us. Like sometimes I might be so busy at work and then I just look and I see a rose-winged parakeet and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And I try to pretend that they are my friends and I kind of look at them and see if they'll come back every day. Maybe you can share with us more of your like experience in researching the primates. I think because a lot of us don't have that experience, so it's really good to understand like what do you do on a day-to-day basis. Maybe you can share with us a bit about the banded languas, because I think they're pretty much a hot topic right now.
Yeah, so the Raffles banded langurs, they are leaf-eating monkeys, meaning that
Mm-hmm.
they do like to consume a lot of leaves. And they are critically endangered because they are only found in Singapore and a small area in peninsular Malaysia, so just the southern parts of Malaysia.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of population size, we're talking about globally 300 to 400 individuals. So that's really, really, few. And because of the critically endangered status, there's also a lot that we can do to protect them, like protecting the forest and also seeing how we can do genetic exchange between the populations in Singapore and Malaysia in order to increase their genetic diversity. So for me and the team, we actually go out to the field early in the morning. Not right now. We can't actually go to the field right now. So usually we will go out in the field in the morning. That's when they are very active, feeding and playing. So we will do field observations. And you mentioned earlier about identifying the whale sharks, right, by their marks.
Mm.
So we do the same for the lanyards, but we use the face to actually identify. So we take a lot of high quality photographs. They're usually very far away, so we need to have the really good zoom cameras to take photographs, and we look at the markings on their faces, different coloration, like the black and the white. And we also give them names because in a way we wanted to make sure that we're able to identify each and every individual of the langurs in Singapore.
Mm.
So it helps with the population monitoring, like has it increased or has it decreased.
How many are there? I'm sorry.
At the moment it's 63, but I heard that there's a new baby in town.
Ooh.
Yeah, so there was a photographer that was happened to be out there and saw that, hey, there's like a white colored baby in the group, so perhaps we have a new baby, so that's 64. Yeah, so slowly it's been increasing, but we're still monitoring their genetic health. And at the moment we need to look at ways to move the populations from Singapore and Malaysia and do some exchange. So yeah.
And do they recognize you? Like, if you see them every day, do you think that, hey, this is my friend today? Maybe you can share with us more about that. It'll be quite interesting.
Yeah, so for the langurs, they are highly intelligent and they are visual animals, just like humans. So they can recognize you if you happen to wear the same colored clothes and also same hairstyle, same backpack. That's what I've been doing for like the first 2 months when I was trying to get them to recognize me, and they did. So they didn't really run away, but they kept like a distance of about maybe 30 meters.
Mm.
There was one time, it was just too hot in Singapore, so I kind of cut my hair short. And the next day, they ran away from me. So that was really, really horrible because it took me 2 months for them to be okay with me. And then I had to spend the next 1 to 2 weeks just for them to say, just for them to recognize that it's the same me. But yeah, so it was quite challenging.
But then your hair grew out now, right? So how do you think as your hair grows longer, like, would they recognize
Even
you?
with my short hair, I was tying a ponytail so that they can recognize that,
Ah.
it's tied behind. But it was quite difficult. So
I thought, it'd be a good example because I think now as a researcher, you can stay there and observe them for a long time. But we should also disclaimer to the audience that actually we shouldn't be going too close to wildlife. We should observe them in the natural space, and try not to touch wildlife, especially in the ocean. Like, even when I'm diving, sometimes I see people want to grab the turtle, touch the whale shark. I think we should let the pros, the professionals, the researchers, if they have to touch a turtle or whale shark, let them do it. But as tourists, we should always respect that distance, right?
I guess there's 2 points I want to mention now that you said about this. I think it's really relevant, especially when we think that ecotourism can actually help the community and also help the wildlife, but it has to be done properly. So,
Yeah.
ecotourism that allows tourists to touch animals, I think that's not right, because it not only harms the animals, health in terms of transmitting viruses to them, but they can also transmit to humans. So, you're not supposed to touch the animals. And another point that you mentioned, it's how sometimes I felt that social media might play a significant role in sending these kind of messages. So even sometimes researchers or professionals, they might post photos of themselves with the animals that they're handling. So they are professionally trained and they need to handle the animal, maybe because they are vets or they're rescuing the animals. But it's quite challenging for people to tease apart the intricacies of touching animals and actually not touching the animal.
Yeah.
So there's a movement to really try to minimize sharing photos of close contact with animals, even for professionals themselves.
Mm,
I think we're almost at like 12, so do you want
I
to take
know.
some so fast?
I know how the time flies so fast. I think before we take the questions, there's just one question that, has been coming up to me. There are a lot of plans in Singapore to redevelop land for transport, for buildings. How do you feel like the conservation community can come in? Because, I think there's been a lot of talk about the underground lines, a lot of reclamation of land. How do you think we can get more involvement of these communities to sort of come together and make sure that we are able to protect our nature capital, our natural capital?
So I think there are a few ways. For example, I think the value of citizen science. We need to tap into citizen science to learn more about environment and also to raise awareness. So if a lot of different conservation projects can recruit the general public to collect data, that's when you can not only get information but also let the general public know what we have in terms of biodiversity and the environment, and also the threats that are facing them. So one example from the Langer project is that because the citizen scientists were actually collecting data and they're always on the ground, they would be able to see when threats are surfacing and threatening the animals. For example, if the animals were to run across on the roads and there are injuries to the animals, they will let us know. So then we would realize that, okay, so in certain hotspots there are a lot of incidents like this, and so we might need to think of ways to mitigate that road incidents.
Mm,
So I think if conservation projects can incorporate this citizen science work, that would be great. And maybe another thing that the nature community or the general public can do is to be more proactive in identifying certain ecosystems or forest habitats. In this case, forest habitats that are valuable or that is worth protecting before plans have been announced that there's going to be a line or some development, and then sometimes it might be a bit too late to say,
mm,
can we not develop this place or can we maintain certain significant
yeah.
habitats? So if we are a bit more proactive, I think we can make more positive changes.
And I think, you brought a very good point about citizen science. To be honest, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I had no idea what citizen science is. So maybe you can share with us what citizen science is, and it will lead very nicely into a question that we have here, which is, can you please elaborate on volunteering opportunities for both organizations for students in Singapore? And I think citizen science plays a very big part of that. It's something you can do anytime, end of the day. So maybe you can share with us, a bit more about that.
Maybe you can share the slide later when
Yeah, I'll share the
after
slide
this.
later, but you can share, yeah.
Yeah, so citizen science is actually simply getting the general public to go out there to be scientists. So, scientists can have different definitions. It doesn't mean that only when you collect a lot of data or do a lot of in-depth analysis, then that will make you a scientist. But, being curious about the surroundings, wanting to ask questions, and also wanting to answer questions, that will make you a scientist already, because you have this, mentality to want to collect the information, analyze the information, and do something about the information. So, with citizen science, we are talking about having the general public to volunteer their time to, different areas, like not just, the terrestrial habitats, the ocean as well, to learn more about what's out there, the biodiversity, and, what kind of data might be interesting to them. But some people are interested in behavior, right? And you can collect information about behavior. Or some people might be interested in what kind of food do do the animals like to eat. So then you can also do some observations like this. And then this data would be shared with researchers or scientists or the government agencies. And then we can look at how we can make use of the data to conserve the habitats and the wildlife. So this is, I think, simply what citizen science is to me. And yeah, so we do have a lot of opportunities for both organizations. Maybe we can.
Yeah, and I thought I would like to share because, for me, something I realized during my work in Philippines is not that to be a marine scientist or to be a citizen scientist doesn't mean that I have to be out in the field every day. There is a space for everyone to sort of come together and bring collective action. So something I realized in Philippines, which I thought I just share, is that one of the biggest challenges organizations, especially NGOs and charities, face is a lack of maybe strategic planning, lack of a need in support for marketing, business development, which was what I learned in my business school. So when I actually came back to school after my stint in Philippines, I decided that, being a marine researcher maybe is not a space for me. I didn't have the opportunity, but I wanted to kind of use what I had learned in school to support. So even volunteering can be like reaching out to any organization. I can tell you all NGOs, all charities, all social businesses always need help in marketing, right, in social media. And even I guess after, you take pictures of the monkey, there are ways to communicate your citizen science efforts and stuff. So these are just kind of like the many broad ways, people can support and volunteer. And even though there's COVID, I know we're all very good with social media, and we'll use our laptops or our laptops. How can we spend our time more effectively using our digital devices? Yeah. So Andie, do you want to pick another question? We have quite a lot. We have some on your research, so I thought that'd be nice to touch upon.
Yeah, so I guess we'll try to answer a few of them, but for those that we can't actually answer today, we can maybe answer through our Facebook or, other social media platforms.
Yeah.
Why don't you pick one for me?
Okay, I pick one. I like this one.
You're interested.
Okay, so Andie, what are your key findings from your research so far, and what have you found about them that we need to protect?
Okay, so thanks for the question. I guess for me, through doing research over a number of years, and not just in Singapore but also in the region, I felt that there's a message that we need to get out there, which is about coexistence with wildlife. So between human and wildlife and the natural environment, whether is it critically endangered species or species that are more commonly seen, and some people might think that they are pests. So I think we need to find a way in order to coexist with different kinds of biodiversity that we have, and this is our natural capital, our natural heritage that we should protect. And not just because they are beneficial to us in terms of ecosystem services, but the fact that they are there and that they have value in being there to share the space with us. So I would say that in a lot of places, for example, in Malaysia or in Indonesia, Vietnam, I see because of rapid urban development encroaching into the natural habitats, a lot of animals are actually coming out of these forests and near urban spaces. So there are people who find pity in that and wanted to, feed the animals, to provide food for them. But in a way, this good intention is also causing negative, impact, because again, we mentioned earlier about the health, and also, you cause the monkeys to be reliant on people. And then you have another group of people who do not like this wildlife that they see. And so there might be ways to want to remove them, for example, like culling or, some aggressive behavior. So I guess we really need the next step, really, at least for, primate research in what I can see in this region, it's to find ways to coexist, whether is it to protect remaining habitats or to, change human behavior in terms of, not feeding the animals, and also creating some connectivity forest connectivity for them to go from one fragmented habitat to the next, so that they don't have to run on the roads. Yeah, so that's for me.
Yeah, and what is the best way that you think people can get educated on not unintentionally feeding wildlife? Um, Maybe you can answer that from a primate perspective, and then I can jump in from more of a ocean perspective.
Sorry, well, I was looking at the question, so I
Oh.
didn't pay attention to your question.
What is the best way to get educated on not unintentionally feeding wildlife?
So, at least for the Jane Goodall Institute Singapore, we have a no feeding campaign that started in November last year when Dr. Jane Goodall was in Singapore. So this 3-year no feeding campaign is meant to educate the general public on the reasons why we should not be feeding wildlife, impacts on the wildlife and ecosystem when you feed them, and how you can join us in terms of collecting data. So to become a citizen scientist, to collect data to find out more about, for example, the long-tail macaques, where they are, where are the hotspots, what are the areas where feeding is happening, and then what we can do to stop. So this is the no feeding campaign that we are rolling out, and we are trying to recruit volunteers to do that for us as well. So then, yeah, for your marine conservation.
Well, I guess for me, one thing I've realized when I go on like beach holidays, or I go snorkeling trips, or I go diving, one of the tendencies that we realize is that these local operators want to make you feel that you're enjoying the experience, and they may unintentionally just give you food to feed the fish, or food to throw into the water to attract animals. And I think that's very unintentional, because to these tourist operators, some of them feel that they want to give you a good experience, and they want to make sure that you want to come back and stuff. So there are good intentions, but sometimes it's just not healthy for the habitat. So for example, fish actually they bite and feed a lot of the bite algae off the coral, and it also forms habitat for them. Disclaiming again, not a scientist. But if you feed them, you sort of like change their behavior, because they're so used to you feeding them, and they're just going to come back, and they sort of neglect the habitat that they're supposed to conserve and protect and actually feed off. So I think from an ocean perspective, the best is just to not feed. And how we can educate ourselves is to look at governing organizations. So for the oceans, Greenfins has a lot of good policies about ocean protection, especially with ecotourism. So yeah, how about you pick the next question, Andie?
Okay, so maybe we look at one I thought was quite interesting about striking a balance. So this is quite long. Maybe I would. So it was about nature parks being great places for recreation, and there are a lot of places that are accessible in Singapore. But how can we actually look at the impact on biodiversity? So there was an example about Thomson Nature Park, where it's a habitat for the banded langurs, and this nature park was actually open end of last year to get people to go into this nature park to learn more about the value of biodiversity. But these are previously uninhabited areas, so by opening it to become accessible to general public, how does it impact wildlife? And the question is how to strike a balance between education and awareness and preservation and conservation of habitat. So you want to share about what you think?
I'm just going to be full honest. I've been feeling so overwhelmed about this, because from a personal perspective, I try to see both sides, right? I can see why the government wants to do this. At the same time, I feel for really trying to strike a balance, and how can we ensure that we protect all these species. you know um, so I think it's hard to draw a line, and I think it's really important to take things into perspective, and also to be open to always ask questions. So I'm going to throw the question back at you to hear your perspective, because you've been on this. I have seen your articles on Today in the newspaper talking about this issue. So I think a lot of people here would really value what you have to say today.
Yeah, no, I'm just sharing what I think, personal opinion. So I guess, like you mentioned, it's really quite challenging. We mentioned just earlier about citizen science, right? So if the general public doesn't know what's there, it's hard for them to appreciate and want to do something to protect them. So if you close access to the general public and you tell them, oh, this habitat is very important, there's important biodiversity, we should protect it, like, what's there? Because you don't allow me to go in. So I guess first I would say that it's very important to make it accessible for general public to know what's out there and what they need to do to protect the biodiversity. But then in order to protect the biodiversity, you need to look at, for example, there are certain areas that should be restricted to the general public because it's really highly sensitive. For example, there are, for the freshwater habitats that are only a few left in Singapore. So without, proper education on behavior when you're near this kind of habitats, you shouldn't allow people to go in because, it might impact the environment. But if we're talking about buffer zones, like Thomson Nature Park is actually a buffer park. So we're not talking about bringing people into Nisun Som Forest and then, walk around the Som habitat in order to learn about the habitats. But if it's a buffer park, which also contains some amounts of the precious habitats that we want to protect, it also opens up an opportunity for them to learn about it, that, there's actually also this habitat in the bigger Central Catchment Nature Reserve, and we should really protect because, this is the few that we have left. So I felt that this could be a balance where you need to look at sensitive areas or core areas that might need to be restricted to the general public, but looking at periphery areas where it also contains similar kind of habitat, but it can be made accessible to people. So I think that's what I felt.
No, it's cool. I think it's really good to get your perspective as well. Because sometimes I think even through these news reports, we don't get the full picture. And I guess that's the point, right? We want to engage with our researchers and scientists to find out what they think and also to kind of drive that balance in terms of like development. Yeah. So I'm going to pick up the next question. Let me see. Hold on. I wanted to address this one because it's also a bit about ecotourism. Linda said, what do you think of Oslop tourist attraction and the whale shark feeding? In my view, I will never take part of such an activity, but it does bring money to the community. And I think that's the question that is always the challenge, right? Maybe in Singapore, we don't have such a challenge, but the whole reason why kind of Seastainable started was to really see how we can leverage the knowledge and resources in Singapore to support our Southeast Asian partners. So for background context, in Oslop, that was where I first worked 6 years ago. It's that they feed whale sharks, right? So they come every day. People bring them out in tourist groups. The feeding happens every morning from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. And they'll try to limit the number of people, 50 packs each hour. But at the same time, they also tell people to maintain a distance from the whale sharks and, to observe proper behavior. But what we're really seeing is that, it's quite sad to see all these whale sharks come in. There are so many people in the water. And sometimes, whale sharks are just moving on their own. You're touching them like unintentionally. So in my view, I think there's a space for everything. If I'm in a position in Singapore when I'm privileged to make a choice in terms of my travel, I wouldn't go back. I will look at other kinds of ecotourism, such as whale sharks observation in southern Leyte. So, instead of feeding them, they have boatmen go out and look for the whale shark and then they bring you there. There's also a lot of natural whale shark interaction in Ningaloo, as well as Maldives. So I think at the same time, I also see my friends in Philippines who don't have the opportunity to travel even on a plane, but they can go down to Cebu and they see the whale sharks and, it really changes their perspective. So I think it's always a personal choice, but if I'm in a position of privilege to make a choice for ecotourism and respecting that, I would definitely make sure I follow what I believe in, which is there should be no feeding. Yeah.
Good point.
Cool. Okay, let's see. Do you want to pick another question? Oh, I like this one. What's your opinion about the changes in ecosystem during and post COVID-19? As you see, there are certain changes are happening, like animals coming to the locality. I want to know whether it has some large-scale impact on both ecosystems during marine. So before we jump into this heavy topic, I have a very important question for Andie. If you cannot choose primates as your favorite animal, what would it be?
Oh, primates are not my favorite animal.
Oh, I did not. So what is your favorite
They're in a
animal?
different level already, so I'm not
Okay,
gonna
okay.
put
So
them in
okay,
the.
relatives.
Yeah, so primates is a different level already. So my favorite animal is actually a wombat.
Mm.
Yeah, because from Australia, because it eats and sleeps at the same time. I thought that was quite cool. Because koala, they spend like 22 hours just sleeping, right? But only 2 hours eating. But then wombat, they can eat and sleep at the same time. So I think it's a good use of time. Anyway,
Okay.
what's your favorite animal?
So I think, right, to be honest, we exclude all marine creatures because those are all my
Okay,
favorites.
same.
But my favorite would be the otters. I think they're very smart, very intelligent, very territorial animals. So I thought this might be a good question. What are some of the large scale impacts on the ecosystem? For example, like you can see all the otters running around, killing people's koi. But at the same time, they bring a lot of joy to people. I also want to know, do you see any impact um in the ecosystem? Like what if, like, is it possible like the otters could go to like Sungai Buloh or like Bukit Timah Park and then start getting a fight primates? Hypothetical. Really just want to know if that's something that's
Fight with
possible.
primates? You say fight with primates?
Yeah, what if they're like the otters come in and they fight with the primates? Is that something that could happen? Or and is there any other impact that you see at the moment?
So if it's the langurs encountering otters, the langurs will run for sure.
Okay.
They will lose to otters.
Yeah.
But if it's macaques, it's very hard to say because we're talking about long-tail macaques. Even though they are quite small in body size, they have
Yeah.
a good social size of maybe 20 to 30 individuals, and they're quite protective, just like otters, being protective of
Hmm.
their family, and also being kind of territorial. So it depends on whose territory they are in.
Hmm.
So if, for example, otters, happen to be in Thomson Nature Park for whatever reason, then
They're
maybe the macaques
everywhere.
will stand ground, right? But if it's in the waters, probably macaques will lose. We'll see. But
Yeah.
yeah,
So do
I
you see
mean,
any changes like this whole period? Or have you heard like?
um, in terms of changes, it's hard to say because, for example, we can't actually go out to the field to
Yeah,
really
that's
see what's
true.
happening. But just from social media reports and how I think it's also linked to what you mentioned earlier about feeding. So in places like Thailand, where the
Mm.
ecotourism, is heavy on feeding animals in order to attract animals to come out from the habitats to let tourists see. When there is this COVID and people can't actually go out to feed the animals, then the animals seem to have no food to eat. So then they are like out in large numbers into the streets, into people's houses to get food. So that's, I would say, one of the things that we can see. There are animals that are coming out like the deers, in Europe and things like that. People are like, oh my god, it's wonderful because animals are kind of reclaiming their habitat. But on the other side, it's the less charismatic animals would not get the same treatment. You'll be like, why is monkeys coming? Why are monkeys coming to my houses? Because when you start to feed them, you already started this, trend of getting them reliant on you. So yeah, I would say changes to ecosystem definitely, but it requires a lot more study to see long-term and short-term impacts.
I think from a marine perspective, right, I just wanted to say I don't think that there has been much change pre and post COVID. I mean, we know for sure that our oceans are warming up, our corals are bleaching. Even though COVID may have temporarily dropped carbon levels, it's accelerating even more as now industries start to ramp up. So, I think we have to be very mindful to not be pegged to the mentality that, COVID is changing things because, effectively, we are still on a trajectory for unsustainable, or we already are in unsustainable growth. So I just thought it'd be important to call that out. So now there's a coral bleaching that I think is happening around Singapore, Malaysia. I need to find the data, but I will share it on the Seastainable page later. Yeah.
So maybe we take one last question, which is also the last one that came up.
Mm.
Do you feel that zoos are ethical? Specifically Singaporean zoos. We only have one. Oh wow. Okay. I know a lot of conservation efforts and research is done at these places, but how do you feel about the general idea of keeping animals in captivity for whatever reason? So I think it applies to not just
Yeah.
the terrestrial but also marine space. Do you, well, do you want to go first or should I?
Okay, I go first. I go first. I think you can end off nicely with our zoo. I think there's been a lot of talk about Resorts World Singapore and the captivity of dolphins. And I don't support that. I realize that there are so many marine creatures that are very intelligent and should not ever be put in a cage. I think it's quite sad that even in Taiwan there's like whale sharks that are supposed to swim to like 2,000 meters below the ocean. They're stuck in a tank above land. Um, but at the same time, I do understand that there are value and merits in terms of protecting endangered species. And I think we must also understand that being able to see, like for example, fishes and sharks is not a privilege that everyone gets to have. You don't get to travel. So I have seen when I am at RWS, I've seen kids who are just in awe of these like amazing manta rays and these sharks, these octopuses, these jellyfish that a lot of us don't have the chance to see. So I think there needs I think I had this conversation with Andie before, right? There should be a list of like animals that should not be in captivity, and there should be like a list of or guidelines for like a certain part of animals, and how I wish there was a regulatory body in the world that could like sort of enforce these guidelines and also show how we need to maintain a balance. Yeah, but maybe Andie, you can jump in on that.
Yeah, so I agree with you about, like you mentioned, dolphins and other animals
Yeah,
that are highly intelligent and they require a lot of space. Keeping them in a limited area, in an enclosed space is really
yeah,
torturous. And for whatever reasons, like education or, research, it's just not justifiable.
yeah,
But I can also see, like you mentioned about the value of education, right? Some people don't have the means to go out there to see the animals in the wild. So they can only, make use of opportunities like at the zoos or in marine parks to actually look at the wildlife. And, it could also motivate them to find out more and eventually become biologists or conservationists. So there is definitely merit. But having said that, I felt that, we need to look at not just the list of species that shouldn't be kept in captivity, but also the reasons why you're
yeah.
keeping them in captivity.
Mm,
So you have like a number of critically endangered species that are out there in the wild, and you can't actually do protection in the wild because there's high level of poaching and low levels of
mm,
enforcement. So in these cases where it's going to a road of extinction, it might be time to intervene and bring these animals in to do conservation breeding, but with the goal in mind that eventually they will be released back into the wild, but in an area where that it's going to be protected and not to the hands of poachers. And in the past, zoos or marine parks in the past, probably they of course have to get the animals from the wild, but
yeah,
the good zoos these days, they do not capture the animals from the wild anymore, and it's based on exchange with other zoos in order to increase the genetic pool of the animals that they keep. So again, the notion of inbreeding, you need to prevent that. So with that in mind, if it's the exchange of animals and no capturing from the wild, then it's something that could be continued. And another thing I think we could make use of, is technology. So, I think these days, because we can't go out to, the zoos or going outdoors anymore, that a lot of places actually showed some videos and also of the animals. So people can actually learn about them in the comfort of the home. So we can also make use of not just videos, but virtual technology like VR, where,
mm,
people can learn about the highly intelligent
yeah,
dolphins without actually having the dolphins in the aquarium. So
mm.
I think there's a lot of ways that we can go around that. But yeah, so okay,
No, tough topics, right?
yeah, but something that we need to reflect on.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's the whole point of having this conversation and discussion. Really, I know, good to hear everyone's insights. So I guess before, we have a few exciting things for our viewers. We are going to share a list of how you can support our organizations. But before that, before we round off, maybe is there anything like last word, not last words. I'm sure it's not going to be last by hearing of you. Any thing you want to say to keep us going on this Saturday?
I guess a few days ago, Dr. Jane Goodall was speaking to The Guardian about how, post-COVID, what are the things that we need to do, like the behavioral changes that humans need to do in order to really make positive changes, because if we don't do it now, it'll be too late. So I guess I just want to leave it out there for all of you that, once everything eases and, economy opens up and kind of back to normal, we shouldn't go back to normal, but look at what we can do to make long-term positive impacts in our behavior. Like, these days we've been doing a lot of like takeaways, use of plastics. What can we do actually not to use the plastics and things like that? So simple actions that can make changes. How
Yeah.
about you?
For me, I think I sort of feel that I've kind of found my place in terms of being a balance between as a business and partnering all these great organizations. I'd say, to all my fellow friends, youth, and peers, to not feel limited. Even though you can't physically go out, it may not be your career choice, but there are always so many ways we can help. And so just before we end, we want to share a bit more. So just give us 1 minute for me to share my screen.
Yes, please.
So a big thank you for everyone who has joined us today. You can use this voucher, Seize the Day, to receive 10% of Seastainable. 20% of all profits and all revenue will go to Jane Goodall for this month to support their initiatives. And I must solely exclaim that please do not buy, and buy only if you need. I think that's pretty much the motto of Seastainable. We don't want you to buy anything that you already have. We have to have mindful consumption. And secondly, for Andie, do you want to share a bit more about conservation opportunities?
Yep. So, like I mentioned earlier about the no feeding campaign, we are trying to recruit volunteers and train them to go out there to collect data on the long-tail macaques, like the hotspots, where they are, what are they doing, is there feeding going on, and what can we do? So please visit this web link, tinyurl.com/LTM-scouts, SCOUTS, to find out more about how you can join us as volunteers. And then, and also we have a donation page in Give Asia, where, you can donate to support all our activities, because for JGIS, we are a charity organization and heavily dependent on donations and also volunteers to actually, realize our programs and activities. So please go to the page.
And lastly, so this month is all about World Environment Day, and we have actually quite a few exciting quizzes that have come up over the past week on our social media. So do follow us. So we actually had a quiz that was done yesterday, and the question is: I have large round eyes, all the better to see at night. I may look cuddly, but I have a venom. I have a yellow liquid which I inject through my bite. When I'm stressed, I curl to a ball. I don't want to become your pet. Wild animals are wild after all. Who am I? So we had this quiz on our social media, and the winner of our pop quiz is Wang at Wildlife Vet. Yeah, Andie, do you know the answer?
No, I do not.
So even I got confused, but yeah, just for everyone
No,
who has been
I know the
taking
answer.
part, you know the answer? Okay, good. You better give us the answer. 'Cause honestly,
Okay,
didn't
so
know.
it's one of the native primates that we have in Singapore, which is the Sundas dolores.
Perfect. So do check out our pages, follow us, ask us any questions, and a big thank you for the Jane Goodall Institute Singapore for collaborating with us this World Environment Day. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Seastainable. And thanks everyone for being here today with us. And any more questions, please put on our social media platforms and we'll try to answer them as many as we can.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a good
Thank
Saturday.
you.
And bye.
Bye-bye.